Welcome to Encounter Wargaming, I'm Jay, and today we're going to be making a sweet little terrain piece out of a simple fish tank decoration. So, a bit out of my own personal life for a second. The wife and I are going through our storage, and basically I found my old fish tank. Now, I haven't used this thing in years. It's probably not worth ever getting started back up again. I mean, if I do decide to, I have an aquarium still, right? But I'd have to get new filters and all kinds of stuff and blah 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 blah. But then when looking at some of the decorations, I was like, these would make great Wargames terrain. So, I picked a couple of pieces that I think would work, and I decided to do it. Now, also discussing my lovely fiance, she always says to me, whenever I'm building terrain or I'm building an army or what have you, she always looks at it, and of course everything I do is grim dark, and it's a battlefield, it's war-torn, and like weathered, and etc., etc. And she always says to me, why can't you do anything pretty? So, I'm going to do a terrain series where we make a table that is pretty, more or less, in her name, in her honor. So, there you go. This is the first piece, I think, that's going to work for this table. We do also need a non-sci-fi table for both our upcoming games of War Machine as well as our upcoming games of Age of Sigmar. So, I'm hoping that I can kind of kill 3 birds with one stone with this one, maybe even 4, depending on how you look at it. And basically in line with all of our past tutorials, like the Trash to Treasure, Toys to Terrain, etc., etc., here I am, taking a simple fish tank decoration and a little bit of ingenuity and turning it into an awesome and quite breathtaking terrain piece, actually. So, that's enough of the backstory. Without further ado, let's get into building this thing. Alright, so we're going to start with a scrap piece of foam core, as always, and more or less I'm just taking an X-Acto knife and I'm going to carve out a rough shape. Just a kidney bean shape as usual, like I usually do for terrain pieces. And then basically just take my little fish tank decoration here and just find a good spot that I think it looks, proper. Just play around with it a little bit. I think it looks good there. So I'm just going to stick some hot glue and stick her down. It's really that simple. Yeah, it's a good spot. And the good thing about hot glue is it gives you a minute or two to kind of move it around, make sure everything's proper. Now, it's time to make the terrain. Like, of course, we don't want a flat surface that this thing's on, especially if it's a ruined temple. So I'm just going to take some spackle and cover the entire thing. Not only will this create an uneven surface, it'll create bumps and like little nooks and crannies all over the piece, but it'll also prevent our PVA glue from warping the piece later on when we go to glue down our sand. Now, I've got some time while that's drying, so I actually noticed that there is bricks on this little temple piece, and I thought, you know what, it might be cool to actually extend it a little bit. So I measured the bricks, and it turns out they're about 1 centimeter by 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters. So here I've got a piece of rubber foam, which is exactly 1 centimeter thick. So all I had to do was cut a 5 millimeter strip and then just cut little 5 millimeter blocks, and I end up with exactly the right size bricks to match the scale of this piece. And yeah, just something fun to extend the piece across the base of the terrain. And as you can see, the spackle is still drying, which is totally fine because I actually want these to be able to kind of harden into the spackle and be buried just slightly, not fully, but like, just a little bit in the mud. And I'm more or less just sticking them on with PVA glue. I mean, I'm just dipping the brick in the glue and then just laying it on top as if I was actually building a wall out of bricks. And of course I want to make a couple of looks like ruined walls coming out from the current piece, and then just some random strays thrown all over the place just to look like it happened a really long time ago and it's all just become buried over since. And yeah, just go crazy with it, get creative with it. The more sort of random you are, the better it's actually going to look. And then once all the spackle's dry, I'm just going to put PVA glue all around the base, trying to just get up next to the bricks without getting too much onto the bricks, and just sprinkle sand all over the base of it. Now I've just got some playground sand, the $5 a bag stuff. It's a nice mix of fine sand, gravel, and some larger rocks, which makes a great terrain surface. And then once that's dry, it's just, as usual, paint the entire thing with a espresso colored rust paint. This goes great at sealing in the sand. It goes over pretty much any material you're going to put it on top of. So in this case, we've got like that ceramic piece, and then the rubber foam, and so on and so forth. And then I've been experimenting with wire trees recently, so I thought, you know what, this piece is just missing something. Maybe I'll try throwing one of these in and actually see if I can make these wireframe trees work for me in various terrain pieces. Plus, I want this to be a really overgrown sort of temple, so it might be cool to have a tree coming out the side, a root coming up the wall like that, kind of, reclaiming the temple in the name of nature. And once I've shaped the wireframe to match my piece, I'm actually going to coat the wire tree in hot glue, and then just hot glue it into the place where I think it should be. Now, I'll go into wire trees, I think, in the future. Like I say, this was just, really my first time doing it, so I don't feel it's quite tutorial worthy yet, but there is other tutorials online that you can check out. So go just search in YouTube, wire trees. You'll get lots of different ways to do it. I kind of found my way to do it in this case, but everybody's got their own way. There's a million different ways to do the same thing, right? Problem is, I decided to do this after I had already put my base coat on. But that's okay, because I need to put a second coat of espresso on anyway. So right now, I'm just going to touch up around the tree, basically just build up with PVA glue and put some sand around it, just so it looks like the roots are partially buried and just kind of sticking up. And then I noticed that there was actually a natural texture on the actual fish tank piece itself, especially on the bricks, that made them look really muddy. And because I used just straight rubber foam, not only are my bricks that I made very clean, but they also show knife marks and stuff. So I've actually just sifted out some sand from my playground sand with a normal strainer just to separate the fine sand, and I'm just going to coat these bricks in fine sand, basically, just to give them a texture. And then, of course, hit it with some more espresso rust paint, bring everything back up to that basic espresso color, and seal everything in. Plus the hot glue, actually, once you paint it, it actually looks quite a bit like bark if you do it the way that I did it. And like I say, I will get into that in a future tutorial, but for right now, we're just going to do this piece, which is actually going to be mostly in the foliage. Now I'm just taking some gray paint, and I'm just going to hit all of the stone areas, so all of the bricks, the pillars, all the areas that are like literally parts of the temple. And I'm just giving them a nice, thick, dry brush of gray. Like I've said before in past videos, it's almost more of an overbrush than a dry brush. You want to go on real heavy with this dry brush. And basically, yeah, just color all of the stone pieces that are involved in the piece. And then, once that's done, I'm just going to take some cinnamon brown, and I'm going to paint all of the dirt. I've actually also decided that I usually paint wood cinnamon brown. I usually paint my trees the same colors, so I'm actually going to give a real thick dry brush. Again, like I say, it's almost more of an overbrush than a dry brush. You want to get real thick with it, but not so much that you're splattering it everywhere. You still want it to look nice and defined. And do the tree, do the dirt, do all of it. And then, as usual, we're just going to finish off the entire piece with a bone color. And this is going to be a really light dry brush this time. So you did the other colors very heavy, and then this one is just going to tie all the colors of the piece together, as well as make every single surface on this thing just pop out at you. Especially because we're going to be covering this with a lot of foliage and other colors and things like that. We want everything here to just really be as vibrant as it possibly can, so that it translates through all of the other crap that we're going to have going on. And yes, I know this is a very simple paint job, but actually quick and dirty is the way I like to do things. And as you can see, it looks pretty cool. So now, first step, I think always first step when I'm doing foliage is static grass. Let's lay down the foundations, right? So I'm just going to go around the piece and cover all the areas I think should have grass on them with PVA glue. And, just throw it on there, sprinkle it off, keep going until the entire piece is covered. And I find, I've said this before in videos, but I will say it again for those who are watching for the first time. I find when you do grass, it looks really silly when you just put like little spots everywhere of it. You want to cover actually a good majority of the ground surface with grass, because usually when there's grass, there's actually more grass-covered areas than there is, just dead earth areas. So don't be sparing with it, go crazy with it, and just get that thing covered in grass. Now I've decided to do some vines growing up the temple. I'm going to have them growing up the tree and everything too. For this, I'm literally using moss. I got it at the Dollarama, just, some dried moss, comes in a bag, and I'm just taking some CA glue, crazy glue for the layman's out there, and sticking it on where I want it. Now, I like to use crazy glue to start off with this kind of foliage and stuff. In fact, I'll be using it on pretty much all the foliages I'll be using today. Mainly because it sticks it right in the place where I want it and dries almost instantly. So it allows me to work very quickly and get things exactly where I want them. And then we'll seal them all down later with PVA and such. So now on the wire tree, of course, I am going to use some clump foliage, as you'd expect, as foliage on the tree. And basically all the little wire fingers that I have sticking out, I want to make sure those are completely covered by the clump foliage. And again, I'm just, dripping a little crazy glue on there and building it up, making sure that that the areas where I put the foliage look nice and full, that there's not a lot of spaces in between, and that you definitely can't see any of the wires. We need to make sure that there are no wires apparent on this thing. And so it's just a matter of going around, sticking it on in random spots, and like I say, the crazy glue will make sure that it stays exactly where you put it until you go to seal it all in later. Now I'm just going to have some fun with some flowers. So just go through your local dollar store and grab all of the stuff, that rose you just saw on camera. Obviously is way too big to use in scale with this stuff. But all that little baby's breath kind of looking stuff that was all around it is perfect in this case for little bunches of white flowers. So I literally just ripped them all off, cut them off with my clippers, and then I'm just, again, going around, crazy glue, sticking them wherever I want them. Just go nuts, putting them all over the place. And like I've said before, the more random you get, actually the more realistic it ends up looking, which is absolutely great. Because it means you don't have to think about it too much. And in fact, if you overthink it, it doesn't look as good as if you just randomly sort of do it. You know what I mean? Just haphazardly throw them around. And I've just got a few other different types of flowers. Now these ones is actually this weird reed that I got, a fake reed at the dollar store. And it's got actually these little ends on it that are almost like little purple styrofoam balls. But when you cut them off and glue them on at this scale, they actually do look like little purple flowers at this scale, which is perfect. So yeah, I basically just cut a bunch of pieces off that, and just like the white flowers, going around, just crazy gluing them wherever I want them. And yeah, that's basically that. And then I've also got this other little piece I got at the dollar store, basically same thing, except it's pink flowers. Again, like little pink styrofoam balls all on a green stem. And I'm just cutting them off the larger plant and going around randomly crazy gluing them in place wherever I feel they should be. Now I try to tend to hit areas where you think there might be a little bit of shade, where it might be a little sheltered from the sun. Also, by putting it in corners like that, you get areas where you missed with your dry brushing, or, you get to cover areas where there's pits because there was a bubble in the paint or whatever. Yeah, you can cover a lot of crimes with foliage, and that's why I absolutely love doing foliage. So anyway, here I'm actually using some more clump foliage, but I'm using a dark green this time, and I'm basically just putting it around as bushes. So you can put this on tree branches as leaves, or you can put it on the ground as bushes. It works great as either. And again, just a little bit of crazy glue and stick it in place. And that's basically it until you go to seal everything in, which is where we're at now. So I'm just dumping a bunch of PVA glue on my palette there. I got a cup of water right next to me. I'm literally just taking the brush and spooning water onto the glue until it's thin enough that I can just sort of cover all of the soft areas that I've now put on. So the moss that we used, the clump foliage, as well as all those little styrofoam flowers and stuff like that, they are glued on pretty well to the stems that they come on, but they're very fragile and they do come off in the future. So hit everything with the PVA. If in doubt, just do it, because it will dry clear. You won't see it afterwards, and it just ensures that anything that isn't quite adhered stays adhered. Especially when it comes to the wire tree, especially these clumps of foliage you see me doing now. They are definitely going to want to flake off in the future. So you want to make sure you soak them real good in that wet, that water and PVA glue, just to make sure that they harden up nice and solid in the future.
And then as they're wet, this is actually a great time. Again, I got another bunch of plants that had these sort of styrofoam balls on them, but they were much bigger. So I thought they'd be a little too big to use on the ground as flowers, but they work great as like buds or, fruits in the trees. So as that glue was still wet, I just went around, ripped all these little styrofoam balls off of the piece I had bought them on, and just randomly stuck them around. And they actually turned out looking awesome. And then after I put them on, I just wanted to make sure, so I just went around one more time with PVA glue and water and just hit all of the spots where I put all of those little fruits all over the tree. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the entire piece, guys. Just wait for all the PVA to dry and you're good to go.
And I can't tell, it's too soon, and it's too soon. And it's too soon.
So I hope you guys enjoyed that little tutorial. Like I say, I will be going into these wire trees in a future tutorial. This was really my prototype phase for the wire trees. I've never done that before, so I think it turned out pretty good actually. So a couple of more of them, and I think I'll be confident enough to show you guys a little tutorial on those too. But there is lots of those things on YouTube already, so feel free to check out other people's tutorials. I mean, that's more or less how I learn, right? Is by checking out terrain tutorials, and that's why I want to make terrain tutorials, so that you guys can experience the joy of terrain making as much as I do. So yeah, just a simple fish tank decoration. Now you can go to your pet store, and a lot of the time these things are only a couple bucks, and I mean, they're made out of this cheap plastic or whatever. I think this one is actually ceramic, but a lot of the time they're made out of a cheap plastic, which means they're actually inexpensive. And they're actually great to use for these purposes. Now the scale might be a little off for 28 or 32 millimeters game, which is what I intend to use it for, but it's not a big deal. I mean, it can probably fit any scale anyway, and the fact that I added these extra bricks to kind of bring out the building kind of makes it look like it could be a house or something, for somebody. In a 32 millimeter or 28 millimeter scale. So anyway, that's that. I intend on this being a more in-depth series as it goes on and on. Of course, I want to be building an entire table for this. Like I say, we need a table for both Age of Sigmar and War Machine as well. I would like us to be able to bring a lot more to the Hogtowner this year than we've been able to in the past. Last year we donated 2, I think we actually stretched it across 3 tables for the Hogtowner. So this year maybe we can do for 5 or 6. I've got a few months, so let's see what I can do. Either way, I think the next few terrain tutorials will be in this vein, going for that sort of overgrown, very vibrant fantasy look. And yeah, we're gonna make a beautiful battlefield. Basically, if you like this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and always comment below, guys. I love hearing encouragement. I love hearing what you guys are building, how you've used these techniques elsewhere, maybe even ways to innovate the techniques. I mean, I'm no guru, right? I just have fun making terrain, and I try to share the love, you know what I'm saying? Basically, if you guys also really like our content more than even just subscribing, you can check out our Patreon campaign just in the description below. Go down there, check it out. For as little as $1 a video, you can support everything we do here, and it gets you all kinds of extra perks. It gets you early content, it gets you discounts off certain online retailers. There's a whole lot more, and it's totally worth that $1 a video. Otherwise, guys, just head to our Spreadshirt page and buy yourself a t-shirt if you just want to one-off support us again. And we'll see you at our next encounter.
Like a monkey in a rocket on his way back home. Okay. Scratching his head upon a milk crate throne. Alright. stand while